Low Resource Population. Chúng tôi xin giới thiệu về giáo sư Craig Anderson là báo cáo viên tiếp theo. Giáo sư Craig Anderson là giáo sư thần kinh học và dịch tễ học, là đang công tác ở Đại học Sydney và đang thực hành lâm sàng với tư cách là nhà thần kinh học tại bệnh viện Royal Prince ở Sydney, Australia. Xin mời giáo sư.
Oh, good morning, everybody. It's an absolute delight to be here in person at your stroke conference, and I'm very grateful for Professor Ton and all the other organisers for this invitation. So, having visited your hospitals today, in recent days and over the years, I see so many patients with stroke in your hospitals, all the doctors, all the nurses running because you're so busy. And I know we talk a lot about stroke treatment, but if we're going to solve the burden of stroke, we also need to be very focused on prevention. And as doctors, you have a very important role to influence the politicians so that prevention becomes a high priority. So I will give you some views on some strategies that may be very important for your population. These are my disclosures. I have editorial and leadership responsibility and have received grants from government and industry. The most important factor is controlling blood pressure. If we have to do only one thing to reduce the burden of stroke, it's more and more to control our blood pressure. This is data from a very important population-based cohort study in China called the Kadoorie Biobank. It's been going for 12 years now. 500,000 Chinese people are being followed longitudinally over time with a lot of data emerging. And the most important factors here in this slide is this continuous linear relationship between blood pressure level and cardiovascular risk. But importantly, you see that the relationship is much steeper for intracerebral hemorrhage. And therefore, on the right, which is the, I can't see my pointer very well, but on the right is the degree of blood pressure reduction from antihypertensive pills. Normally 2 antihypertensive pills would give you at least 10 millimetre systolic blood pressure difference, and you can see that in terms of the prevention, that's very powerful for intracerebral hemorrhage. Unfortunately, we don't do it very well in the community, and this is a prevalence study of hypertension awareness published a few years ago, the PURE study. You know, only about a half of people are aware of hypertension. Maybe in Vietnam, maybe only 1/3 people are aware they have hypertension. Even less get treatment, and even less get good control. So you've got 3 problems: finding the patients, treating them well, and getting the patients to understand they can't feel high blood pressure, but they still have to take their pills. Now, there are various campaigns, and this is one of them by the International Society of Hypertension. It's called May Measurement Month. And I think Vietnam participates in this program, is to go out once a day a year to do very widespread screening for people with hypertension, and maybe more screening in factories, in schools, in hospitals to find people with hypertension. But you can see here that the people who had a previous heart attack or stroke, overall, their blood pressure was very similar to those who don't have hypertension, but unfortunately you can see that people who already have hypertension and no cardiovascular risk, it's still not very well controlled. Now, there may be a little bit of anxiety when the people went along to have their blood pressure, but there's still a lot of work to be done around blood pressure control. As part of blood pressure across the population, a big driving force is our diet. And the two factors I wanted to emphasise, because they're very important in Vietnam, is salt and fruit. And the big component of fruit is potassium. And the potassium and salt interact. And I know that there is a high use of salt. You like to make the food more flavoursome and in your soup. And but on the right is also from the Kadoorie Biobank study showing the relationship between amount of fruit consumption in a month and cardiovascular events. And you can see that people who have a lot of fresh fruit, not watermelon, that watermelon is just water, bananas, oranges, apples, get the potassium, is good for the body, and the more the better. Now, my colleague, Professor Bruce Neal from the George Institute, and his colleagues did this mammoth study in China to prove that if we could reduce our salt, we will prevent cardiovascular disease. He randomised villages in China, and he gave the families a potassium-enriched low-sodium salt. You can't tell the difference between full sodium and potassium-enriched. It's a 30% supplement of the sodium, and follow them longitudinally, and you will never see a better result. Clearly significant reduction in stroke, clearly significant reduction in cardiovascular events, and clearly improved survival without any harm. So this was definitive evidence that if we can just reduce our salt consumption a little bit, and a good way to do that is potassium-enriched low-sodium supplements, this could be something that we could use more broadly in our populations. Unfortunately, and this is an issue in my country, most of our salt comes from processed food, cans, and also I see it in Vietnam, chips, packaged food full of sodium, bread, cheese, meat. They put a lot of salt in it. So if we're going to solve the problem on salt, we also have to work with industry, we have to work with government, help them, obviously, the taxes and the money that comes from salt as part of this approach for all of us for healthy diets is very important. And you know about the healthy diet pyramid. What about in the rural areas? How can we get to manage the blood pressure better in rural areas? We don't need doctors. And this is another trial from China where we trained up nursing staff or even lay people to go out testing blood pressure and having the authority under the direction of doctors to give people some free medication. It worked to get the blood pressure down, but you can see it took a long time, at least 1 or 2 years. So it's effective to do this type of approach, service delivery approach, but it does take longer. We need something a bit simpler, and then obviously getting blood pressure under control translates into preventing cardiovascular disease significantly. There are simple approaches, and the WHO has come out with these recommendations to use combination pills. In medical school, our pharmacologists told us, go carefully, titrate the medication, make sure there's no harms. I can tell you, it's a whole lot of rubbish. People who have hypertension, you have to go fast and you have to go quickly, and people who are at high risk need at least 2 or 3 medicines, not just 1, 2 or 3. And the WHO are now recommending, where possible, to use combination antihypertensives. So you've heard these things now, polypills, mixing medications together in a single pill, low generics, low cost, triple antihypertensive, or even putting in amlodipine, blood pressure pills and a simple pill. So the person only needs to take one pill, not 3 or 4 pills. It could make things simpler and cheaper. And hopefully this type of medication can be more available. And at the George Institute, we have been testing this approach with low dose triple combination antihypertensive pills. And this was one we did in Sri Lanka called Triumph, where we gave people the low dose triple pill versus standard of care. And we show here on the graph, we got the blood pressure under control quicker and more sustained with no side effects. And we've done other testing with this approach, one in Nigeria, getting the blood pressure down very quickly. The Triumph one was in Sri Lanka, and another one we did in general practice in Sydney, where was 4 quarter dose, combination of quarter pills, got good blood pressure control. And I'm leading a very big study called Trident, where we're testing this combination of triple half dose antihypertensives in patients of intracerebral hemorrhage. As I showed you in my first slide, people with intracerebral hemorrhage are very sensitive to blood pressure, are very sensitive to getting the benefits of blood pressure control. And maybe the combination low dose antihypertensive can make life much simpler, much easier, and very effective. You don't need to bring the patients back to the clinic all the time to check their blood pressure. A quick test, make sure everything's okay, and then encourage them then to continue their medication long term. And we've been going a long time. International clinical trials are very challenging. This is double blind, placebo controlled. We got caught in COVID. We wanted to bring the trial to Vietnam. We were very ready to go, but we had to stop because of the problems with the quarantine and lockdowns in Vietnam, but we were able to keep going elsewhere, and hopefully we can present the results to you in a few years' time. We need to still keep going to get all the results. Let me return again to the dietary issue. As I said before, please encourage the family, your children, and do everything. This issue is around how do we help people to get good food and nutrition. We have developed an app which can put on your phone that can scan the barcode of the packet and give you some information about the health content, the salt content, produce a traffic light, red bad, orange medium, green good. It can also direct you to an alternative, a healthier choice. So some apps can be quite useful, and I know they're interesting. And but another approach that may be even more important is linking this app to global health, because our food is dependent on the environment and farming and the temperature and water. And maybe now we're thinking more globally. Everybody in the world is dependent on everyone, and maybe having some metric coding of our food linked to damage to the planet. And so returning to salt, reducing salt, improving fruit consumption, vegetable, and thinking about the global consequences of our farming and the environment and water supply, helping us to think smart about our nutrition and health. And We've looked at other strategies through the George Institute office in China, is also working with our children in schools. You know, children are very influential to their parents. If the children can be influenced by health in school, they can bring the information back to their parents, and the parents can then work in the community, in the villages. So when we're thinking about health, it's not just to doctors, it's also thinking about teachers and the community to making it important to prevent stroke and heart disease. Children, influencing children and behaviour is our future, and that's what's important to the community. There are other programs that various people are putting together called Hearts around screening, simple factors, getting blood pressure, checking diet, that I'm sure you hear about, various components here about using the evidence, and you'll hear a lot about the various stages of the evidence through the conference today. There are other sort of factors that you can look at in terms of your healthy life, like sleep and stress. I'm sure that in Hanoi, driving in the traffic is very stressful to your health, and how to manage that. You can get a bit of an indicator of this. And some studies have shown that the more healthy factors in the healthy 8, the lower the risk for preventing us for stroke. And this is a number of surveys and studies that have shown that if we can implement in the community, in people, if we can implement strategies for healthy lifestyle, you can show there's a clear benefit in preventing the disease. And that's clearly what our strategies should be in parallel with our healthcare delivery. Healthy 8 is one of the programs that is very popular around the world. So, to summarise, stroke prevention. You have a key leadership role in the community. People look up to the doctors. You can influence your Ministry of Health and your leaders. Simple advice to the patients is very important. Please take your medicines. Very important to control your blood pressure, thin your blood. Effective blood pressure control is best to prevent the strokes from happening in the first place, but it's also important to prevent recurrent strokes from happening. And we have to also think about ways that we can influence our general diet and activity, and some simple treatments like combination blood pressure lowering. It's very important, and simple lifestyle factors in healthy communities. And then finally, just to remember the essential 8 factors that I have talked to you about. And finally, thank you very much for your attention, and just to remember that we're all part of a global community now who are very interested in how we are all connected to learn from each other, and having international conferences like this is very important for us to share, to learn and be informed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Anderson, and your presentation. So now, I would like to invite Professor Christopher Chen. His presentation, Mechanism of Post-Stroke Recovery and Importance of Multimodal Treatment. Please, thank you. Giáo sư Chen là bác sĩ lâm sàng, nhà khoa học cấp cao tại khoa dược lý và tâm lý, trường y Yong Loin, Đại học Quốc gia Singapore, đồng thời là giám đốc Trung tâm Nhận thức và Lão hóa trí nhớ. Hiện tại ông là Chủ tịch Hiệp hội Chống sa sút trí tuệ châu Á, là thư ký Hiệp hội Thần kinh học châu Á và Châu Đại Dương, đồng thời là cựu Chủ tịch của Hiệp hội Quốc tế và rối loạn nhận thức và hành vi mạch máu. Xin trân trọng kính mời.
Good morning, everybody. Can I have the first slide? Oh, excellent. Well, Good morning. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful conference. It is a real pleasure to be back in Vietnam. Like many of you in Singapore, we weren't allowed to travel during COVID. So my memories of Hanoi are from several years ago. So actually, I must really congratulate Vietnam for the remarkable progress that has already been accomplished in the last couple of years. Some people may not recall, but when I first came to Hanoi in the 1990s, there weren't many cars, there weren't many motorcycles. Everybody was on bicycles. And now you have highways from the airport, so that's tremendous. And I understand that during COVID, you even opened your first metro system, so fantastic. Now, I'm going to have the pleasure of talking to you about something very different from what Craig was talking about, which is recovering from your stroke. Of course, the best way to recover from a stroke is not to have the stroke in the first place, but we have many patients who unfortunately have had stroke. So how do we make them recover better? And I'm going to emphasize that it's really going to be multimodal treatments which are going to help. There's no single magic bullet. So to understand stroke recovery, we need to go and have some idea of the mechanisms which underlie stroke recovery, and as well of course, injury. So as you can see from the slide, once you have a stroke, bad things happen very quickly. In the first seconds, minutes after a stroke, you lose energy supply, you have an increase in excitotoxic neurotransmitters such as glutamate, you have a big influx of calcium into your cells, and you have a lot of oxidative stress. This, together with neuroinflammation, leads to cell death. But of course, at the same time, you start having recovery processes, and these include neurogenesis as well as angiogenesis, the ability to create new cells and new blood vessels. And what we need to do is to remember that these are constantly happening over time, and so we need treatments which attack multiple mechanisms at different stages of stroke recovery. Here's a very nice study from back in the 1990s done by Pam Duncan to show us what we all really appreciate from observing our stroke patients. In that, recovery happens over time. The most recovery happens in the first 90 days, but subsequently, there is still gradual recovery. The most important factor which affects the amount of recovery you make is the severity of your stroke. Patients with moderate stroke, and especially patients with severe stroke, never seem to recover back to baseline. And of course, this is a challenge as well as our opportunity to improve outcomes. We want to go and improve stroke recovery to get people back to their baseline or as close to the baseline as possible. One of the key concepts in the understanding of ischemic stroke and post-stroke recovery is that of the penumbra. The penumbra is an area of reduced perfusion, but is not at the moment dead. So if we can rescue the penumbra, we can affect stroke recovery. The penumbra depends on distance away from the ischemic core, as well as the fact that it changes over time because of reperfusion. So we actually have an opportunity to affect this transition from injury to recovery. The ischemic penumbra can be measured in various ways using sophisticated neuroimaging. And it can also be affected by vascular intervention, such as thrombolysis or mechanical thrombectomy to reperfuse. But increasingly, we also understand that the penumbra can be rescued by cellular interventions as well. Treatments to improve neuroprotection or to increase neural repair. It is also important to remember that the ischemic penumbra is not the only target we have. The ability of the brain to enhance axonal sprouting and the formation of new synapses, called neuroplasticity, as well as the ability to regenerate new cells and new vessels, is also an important target, apart from reperfusion. And one concept is that of new cells. So contrary to what was believed before, the brain actually can produce new neurons. So in animal models, in a particular area called the SVZ, you have new neurons which can be guided to new areas in the brain, and there they can form new connections to restore function. In addition to these areas of neurogenesis, there are also potential cells within the parenchyma itself which can regenerate. So a neurorestorative strategy is also vital for stroke recovery. I'm sorry for this very complicated slide, which has too much on it. I just want you to remember that we have probably a combination of treatments that will enhance our ability to recover. Firstly, perhaps some pharmacological means to prime the brain to recover, and then to consolidate recovery using standard methods such as rehabilitation, etc. Also, the slide also emphasizes that functional recovery is not due to any single factor. We probably have to put together all these important areas such as neuronal modifications, changes to growth proteins, neurogenesis, angiogenesis, as well as encouraging beneficial plasticity in order to go and improve functional recovery. All right, so that's all the theoretical basis. The rest of the talk now, I'm going to be speaking about a particular research program that I have been fortunate to be involved in to try out exactly this kind of multimodal treatment. So MLC 601, MLC 901 is a traditional Chinese derived compound, also called NeuroAid. And in animal stroke models, it has been shown to have several very important pharmacological properties. And these include things that I've talked about before. It includes neuroprotection, so it reduces all the neuroexcitotoxicity and many other mechanisms in stroke. It also has powerful properties which are anti-inflammatory, which is also very important for stroke recovery. And finally, it has properties for neural repair. So it can enhance neurogenesis as well as angiogenesis. So in just one compound, which is made out of multiple herbs, there is this potential therapy which is multimodal. The evidence for a beneficial effect in clinical practice comes from a large trial that we performed in Southeast Asia called the CHIMES trial, which was an acute stroke study, followed by a long-term follow-up study, which we call the extension study. And both of these has been published. One in a journal which Craig now edits, so it must be a good journal. So CHIMES and the CHIMES extension study, as I said, was a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, followed up long-term, and it was performed in Singapore, Thailand, Hong Kong, the Philippines, as well as in Sri Lanka. 1,100 subjects were recruited, and we followed them up in this manner. The CHIMES trial was acute. As you can see, patients were either randomized to treatment with NeuroAid or placebo for 3 months. There was an outcome at 3 months. And then the extension study studied people from 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, up to 24 months. Important to say that over this follow-up period, the treatment allocation remained blinded, both to the patient as well as to assessors, and that all patients receive standard stroke care as well as policies on rehabilitation. I think the CHIMES extension study results were promising. Although the primary endpoint of a MRS shift was not statistically significant, when you look at complete recovery, in other words, an MRS score of 0 to 1, there was a statistically significant improvement at month 6, which persisted to month 18 statistically and probably persists to month 24. In addition to this difference in modified Rankin scale, there was also a statistically significant difference in a Bartel index, meaning that patients also improved in terms of their activities of daily living. Importantly, we also studied whether NeuroAid, when combined with rehabilitation, had a better effect. So within the trial, we had subjects who were given rehabilitation and those for which no rehabilitation was ordered. And we could split these groups up into those who were given NeuroAid and those who were given placebo. Again, important to say that everything else remained exactly the same. They all got the same secondary stroke prevention treatment. They all received, they all were blinded to treatment allocation. The results, I think, were very encouraging. Regardless of the time point, you can see that the patients who were on rehabilitation as well as NeuroAid performed better. I think this is one of the proofs of concept in the idea that you need both priming treatment as well as consolidatory treatment in order to improve stroke recovery. Now, one criticism of the trials has been that most of the trials have been done in Asia. You often never hear the opposite, that trials which are done in Europe are then applied to Asian populations. But I'm glad to say that MLC 901 or NeuroAid has also been used in non-Asian countries. So this is a trial, or at least a prospective registry study, which comes from Spain. And what they did was that patients were either given NeuroAid or they were given standard stroke care. And importantly, they also showed that subjects who were given NeuroAid had improvements over those who were given standard stroke care. And both groups included subjects who had been thrombolized. So I think that the results from NeuroAid may be generalizable to global populations. We took the opportunity of analyzing savings in time to achieve full functional recovery. So this is a chart showing what happens if you're on NeuroAid or not on NeuroAid. And you can see that those who are on NeuroAid, 40% of the subjects achieved full functional recovery. But the time difference was 18 months. So that's a huge amount of time saving. So I now conclude by saying that I hope that I've given you a better appreciation of what the mechanisms are for stroke recovery and how it might be possible to develop treatments for stroke recovery in combination with rehabilitation. Thank you very much.